Most people see a boarded-up post office and think one thing: dead weight, a relic, the kind of building the government forgot about the moment they stopped sorting mail there. But what if I told you that exact building, the one sitting empty on Main Street in your hometown, is quietly going up for sale right now, and the government is practically begging people to take it off their hands? Not just to tear it down, to live in it, to transform it into something that actually matters again. This is where most real estate videos get it wrong. They show you the exterior, tell you the price, and move on. But there's something much stranger happening underneath these transactions. Something the federal government doesn't advertise. Something that changes how you should actually think about buying one of these buildings. It's not just about finding a cheap property. It's about understanding why the government can't hold on to these places anymore, and why that creates the opportunity of a lifetime for people who understand what they're really looking at. Let me walk you through something most people don't realize. The federal government owns roughly 600,000 buildings across the United States. Not land, buildings. Structures with roofs and walls and plumbing that cost taxpayers billions of dollars every single year just to maintain. A post office in rural Pennsylvania costs $4.000 annually to keep from falling apart, even though it processes mail for maybe 12 people a day. A decommissioned IRS field office in Tennessee sits completely empty. Air conditioning running, lights on in the hallways, heating system churning through fuel, costing American taxpayers roughly $6.000 a year in perpetuity for absolutely nothing. This is the inefficiency that nobody talks about. This is the reason the Federal Real Property Initiative exists, and why thousands of these buildings are now being offered to private buyers at prices that seem almost insulting when you consider their actual construction value. But here's where it gets interesting. And here's where most people miss the real story entirely. These aren't just cheap properties because the government wants to get rid of them. They're cheap because of something much more consequential, something that affects what you can actually do with them once you own them. The moment the federal government sells you a building, they lose control over it. But before they sell it, they've already deeply shaped what it is. The zoning is locked in. The structural integrity might be compromised. The location might be in a place where nobody actually wants to live. And the historical designation, which protects the building's architectural integrity, can sometimes make renovation almost impossibly expensive. Take the case of the Chicago and Northwestern Passenger Depot in Omaha, Nebraska. This isn't a government building in the traditional sense, but it's exactly the type of property we're talking about. A massive, beautiful, completely empty structure that was once the beating heart of a city. Someone bought it for $2.50,000 just 4 years ago. The building itself is worth millions in terms of square footage and craftsmanship, but to legally live there, to convert it into residential space, would cost another $3 millions in renovation just to meet modern code requirements. The buyer is now stuck. Not technically stuck because they own the building outright, but practically stuck because the gap between what they paid and what it would cost to make it functional is a chasm they can't cross. This is the hidden mathematics of buying decommissioned federal buildings. The government prices them low for a reason. They want them off the books. They want to transfer the liability. But they're not transferring just a building. They're transferring all of the complexity that comes with a building that was designed 80 years ago for a completely different purpose, in an era when building codes were entirely different, when materials were entirely different, and when nobody was thinking about whether a former customs house could ever become a loft apartment. So let's flip the script completely. Instead of asking, what decommissioned federal buildings can I buy, we should be asking a harder question. Which decommissioned federal buildings can I actually afford to make livable, and which ones are just beautiful money pits wearing a price tag that feels too good to be true? Because that distinction matters. It matters enormously. And it's the difference between finding a life-changing property and discovering that you've just purchased a 15,000 square foot headache that's going to drain your savings for the next decade. Here's what nobody tells you. Federal buildings come in 3 categories. The first category is the ones that are genuinely convertible, usually smaller structures, like post offices or customs houses in towns where there's actually demand for residential space. A post office in Asheville, North Carolina, sold last year for $1.85. The buyer converted it into 3 apartments, and those apartments are now generating rental income. That works. That's the deal that actually pencils out. But those buildings are rare, very rare. The second category is the buildings that are architecturally significant. These are the ones with the beautiful bones, the ornate details, the historical value. A former courthouse in Galveston, Texas, is extraordinarily beautiful. Soaring ceilings, marble staircases, stained glass skylights. It's sold for $320,000, but it's also on the National Register of Historic Places, which means any exterior modifications, any structural work, any renovation has to be approved by the State Historic Preservation Office. That approval process can take 18 months. It can add 30% to your renovation costs. And if you want to do something that the Preservation Office doesn't like, say, knock out an interior wall to create an open plan loft, you're not getting that approval. And then there's the third category, the buildings that are cheap because they're genuinely broken. A former IRS processing center in Detroit is listed for sale for $5,000, $95,000, for a building that's 220,000 square feet. That sounds impossibly good until you understand that the roof is actively leaking in 47 different places, the electrical system predates the 1970s and is a fire hazard, the foundation has structural cracks, and the building is in a part of the city where commercial real estate is still struggling. You might buy that building for $5,000, but you're going to spend $3 million bringing it up to code. The math doesn't work. It just doesn't. So when you see a headline that says 7 decommissioned federal buildings you can buy right now, here's what you need to understand before you get excited. That headline is technically true. You absolutely can buy those buildings. The problem is that the ability to purchase something and the ability to make that purchase make economic sense are two completely different things. And the government's pricing strategy doesn't account for that difference. They're not pricing these buildings based on what you can actually do with them. They're pricing them based on what they need to get them off the federal inventory. There's another angle to this that almost nobody discusses. When a federal building becomes available for sale, there's a hierarchy of buyers. The government doesn't just open it up to random individuals. Nonprofits and government entities get first crack. Community organizations get second crack. Other public bodies get third crack. And only after all of those groups have either expressed interest or explicitly passed does it go to private buyers. This delays the process significantly. It also means that the buildings that actually make it to private sale are often the ones that nobody else wanted. And there's usually a reason nobody else wanted them. But, and this is important, there are exceptions. There are actually federal buildings that have come onto the private market and become genuinely successful residential conversions. A former post office and federal courthouse building in Butte, Montana sold for $275,000 and was successfully converted into 23 luxury apartments. The building is now fully occupied, generating strong rental income, and the owner recouped his investment in less than 7 years. How? Because the buyer understood something fundamental. He didn't just buy the building. He understood the market. He understood the neighborhood. He understood that Butte is experiencing a genuine revitalization, that young people are moving back to Montana cities, and that there's actual demand for urban residential space. Those factors made the difference between success and failure. And this brings us to the most important realization. The decommissioned federal buildings that are actually worth buying aren't the ones you find in articles titled 7 cheap buildings the government is selling. The ones worth buying are the ones you find by understanding the fundamental forces reshaping American real estate right now. Young people are moving back to smaller cities. Remote work has made location less critical. Historic preservation tax credits have made renovation financially viable in certain circumstances. And the buildings that benefit from those forces, that's where the real opportunity is. So let me show you 5 decommissioned federal buildings that are actually on the market right now. But instead of just showing you the price and the location, I'm going to walk you through the actual math. I'm going to show you the buildings that might actually work economically, and I'm going to show you the ones that are cheap for a very good reason. Because understanding the difference is literally the difference between building wealth and building a very large, very beautiful mistake. The first one is a decommissioned Social Security Administration processing center in upstate New York. 15,000 square feet of 1970s federal brutalism, concrete block walls, industrial HVAC systems still bolted to the roof, fluorescent fixtures that haven't hummed in 4 years. The asking price is $68,000. And when you see that number, your instinct is going to be to start doing renovation math in your head. Do not do that yet. Stop. Because the first number you need to know is the cost per square foot for commercial renovation in that county. It is roughly $160 per square foot. That means this building, stripped down to studs, would cost you $2.4 million just to make it into a shell that has heat and electricity. The building itself cost less than 3% of its own renovation. That is not a deal. That is a mirage. And mirages, this obvious, are not actually cheap. They are just abandoned. But there is a category of federal building where the math actually does work. These are the buildings that have already been partially redeveloped. They have working roofs. They have electrical panels that have been upgraded in the last 10 to 15 years. They have HVAC systems that are old but functioning. They are the buildings where someone else has already paid for the expensive part, keeping it from falling apart, and those buildings exist. Most people do not know where to look for them, but they exist. There is a converted fire station in Portland, Oregon that sold last year for $135,000. 4,000 square feet, completely renovated. Bathroom, kitchen, mechanical systems, all updated. The reason it was cheap is because it had been sitting on the commercial real estate market for 8 months. Nobody knew about it. The listing agent was a generalist who did not know how to market adaptive reuse properties. The building sat invisible because it was in the wrong database, listed under the wrong category, photographed poorly, described generically. By the time anyone who actually cared about unconventional real estate found out about it, the seller was tired of carrying the taxes and utilities. They dropped the price $40,000 below asking, and it sold in 19 days. That is the pattern you are looking for. Not the cheapest building, the invisible building, the one nobody is marketing correctly, the one that has been listed for long enough that the owner is starting to panic about carrying costs, the one where the listing agent does not understand what they have. Those are the buildings where you can actually make the economics work, because you are not buying at the top of the market. You are buying at the point where frustration and obscurity have created an accidental discount. Now let me show you a building where the conversion math gets really interesting. There is a decommissioned elementary school in rural Kentucky, built in 1952, closed in 2008 when the county consolidated school districts. 2 stories, 22,000 square feet. Being sold by the county for $39,500. Full asking price. They are not motivated to lower it because they do not care. They are not paying the mortgage or the utilities anymore. The building sits empty, and the county is content to let it sit empty indefinitely while they wait for someone to buy it and take the liability off their books. But here is what makes this one interesting economically. The building is on 3 acres. The roof was reshingled in 1997 and is still good for another 5 to 10 years. The structural bones are solid. This is a building built for children, which means it was built to code that is actually more stringent than commercial code in many cases. And the county has already kept the property maintained just enough that it is not falling apart. The conversion potential is enormous. You could split this into apartments, you could create a mixed-use residential and commercial space, you could build a small multifamily complex on the remaining land if you wanted to. The building itself is almost free. What you are actually buying is the legal right to build something on 3 acres in a county where land is very cheap, and zoning for residential conversion is permissible. The math on this building is different because you are not really renovating it. You are assembling it into something else, and the cost of assembly depends entirely on what you want it to become. If you want to convert it into 5 residential apartments, your costs are different than if you want to build a community center. If you want to demolish the back half and keep the front as residential, your costs change again. The building is not a finished product you are buying. It is a platform for production, and platforms are cheaper than finished products every single time. This is the distinction that separates buildings with actual opportunity from buildings that are just old. A true conversion opportunity is not about finding the cheapest price. It is about finding the lowest cost basis relative to what you can build. The Social Security building in New York is cheap because it would cost millions to make it useful. The school in Kentucky is a platform because the bones are sound and the zoning already permits residential development. Those are completely different economic problems. Now, there is another category of federal building that moves the needle in a completely different direction. These are the buildings where government actually maintained them to a level that makes sense. These are typically military buildings, And the reason military buildings are different is that the military does not retire buildings slowly. They maintain them aggressively, or they destroy them completely. There is almost no middle ground. So when the military does sell or lease a building, what you are getting is usually something that was maintained to a standard that you would recognize as normal. There is a decommissioned army barracks in rural Texas being sold by GSA, which is the General Services Administration. This is where the federal government auctions off surplus property. The barracks is 214 acres, 23 individual buildings, power plant on site, water treatment already installed. The asking price is $412,000. For perspective, that is about $2,000 per acre in a rural Texas county where residential land is selling for $8,000 to $12,000 per acre in developed areas. This is land that is below market because it comes with the burden of maintaining old government structures. But the real opportunity here is not in the land value. It is in the infrastructure. A power plant, water treatment, roads and utilities already run through the entire property. If you wanted to develop this into a community of any kind, residential, commercial, mixed use, recreational, you would normally have to spend hundreds of thousands installing those systems from scratch. They are already here, they are old, yes, they will need updating, yes, but the capital investment in basic infrastructure has already been made by the federal government. This is the factor that changes everything about the economics of a federal building sale. The government builds to last. They install redundant systems. They over-engineer utilities. And when they leave behind a skeleton that is far more robust than what a private developer would build for the same location and the same price. You are not just buying a building or a piece of land. You are buying a built-out infrastructure platform that would cost astronomical amounts of money to replicate on an empty site. The challenge with the Texas barracks is that it requires capital and vision to activate. You cannot just flip it. You cannot just renovate one building and sell it. You need a plan. You need zoning approval for whatever you are building. You need either capital or investors or both. But if you have those things, what you are looking at is potentially the lowest cost basis on a fully developed rural site in the state. And that changes the conversation about what is actually possible. There is one more category of federal building that deserves attention, and this one is genuinely unusual. These are buildings that are sitting in the path of gentrification, but have not been gentrified yet. They are the forgotten buildings in the neighborhoods that are changing fast. A decommissioned post office in a secondary city in Ohio is a good example. Built in 1941, 3 stories, 23,000 square feet, sold by the Post Office Service to a private investor 5 years ago for $87,000. That investor immediately listed it for residential conversion. And then something happened that nobody predicted. The neighborhood started changing. Young people started moving in. New restaurants opened. Property values in the immediate surrounding area increased by 45% in 4 years. The post office building was not special, but the location became special. And the building, which was cheap because the neighborhood was not desirable, became valuable because the neighborhood changed. This is the wild card in the federal building market. You cannot predict gentrification with certainty, but you can recognize the conditions where it becomes likely. Secondary cities with job growth, neighborhoods with character and existing architecture, proximity to universities or hospitals or growing employers, young people moving back in, small businesses opening. These are the signals. And when you see a federal building sitting cheap in a neighborhood showing those signals, you are looking at a potentially exceptional opportunity, not because the building is special, but because the location is becoming special and the building is still priced as if nobody knows it yet. The key here is timing. You need to move before the neighborhood finds itself. Once the coffee shops arrive and the real estate blogs start writing about up-and-coming this and hidden gem that, the price floor shifts. Buildings that were on the market for $90,000 suddenly have 5 serious offers. The government property advantage only works if you are paying attention to neighborhoods nobody else is talking about yet. Subscribe to county property auctions. Follow local economic development reports. Read the planning department documents. This is where the real deals hide, and most people never even know to look. Now let us talk about the comparison nobody puts on the same screen. Because we have walked through courthouses and factories and schools and bunkers. But which one actually makes sense for your situation? Let me break this down by what matters most to you. If you want the lowest absolute purchase price, the bunkers and ammunition storage facilities are your answer. You can find Cold War relics for $20,000 to $40,000 in rural areas, especially in the Mountain West and parts of the Great Plains. The structure is bulletproof, literally. The bones are solid, but the renovation is specialized. You are working with reinforced concrete, limited window options, awkward room configurations. The contractor network for this work is small, which means you are paying premium labor costs. Budget an additional $80,000 to $150,000 for serious renovation work. You are looking at $120,000 to $200,000 total, but you own something absolutely unique. If you want the best raw potential for value appreciation, the courthouses and municipal buildings in gentrifying neighborhoods are the play. These are substantial structures with character. They are positioned in downtown areas that are already showing signs of revival. The renovation costs are moderate compared to bunkers. You are looking at $30,000 to $80,000 depending on condition. And the location advantage means your property is going to benefit from broader neighborhood momentum. 5 to 10 years out, you could see genuine equity growth, not speculation, location-driven appreciation. If you want to split the difference and minimize renovation hassle, the schoolhouses and church conversions are your middle ground. These buildings are already partially finished. They have bathrooms, they have electrical systems. The previous institutional use actually makes them easier to convert to residential because the bones are there. You are really doing aesthetic renovation, not structural. Buy price is typically $40,000 to $90,000. Renovation costs run $30,000 to $60,000, and you end up with something genuinely livable within 6 months instead of 2 years. The wild card is always the factory and warehouse conversion. These are the buildings with the most dramatic before and after potential. Raw brick, soaring ceilings, massive open floor plans. If you have vision and are willing to swing a sledgehammer, these can become something genuinely stunning. But they require the most intensive renovation work. Structural assessment, asbestos remediation, usually. Complete electrical and plumbing infrastructure. These are $50,000 to $120,000 projects, on top of a $30,000 to $70,000 purchase price. Only do this if you actually love the challenge of renovation and have the financial runway to weather delays. Here is the honest truth about all of these properties. The building is only half the equation. The other half is your personal situation. Do you have time to manage a renovation? Do you have access to capital if unforeseen problems emerge? Do you actually want to own a unique property, or are you looking for a conventional investment? Can you handle the reality that your property is never going to be normal in the way that suburban subdivision homes are normal? Can you live with something that is slightly strange and deeply yours? These properties attract a specific kind of person, someone who sees possibility instead of problems, someone who values authenticity over convenience, someone who wants a story to tell, not just an asset to hold. If that is you, then every single property we have covered today is within reach. Not because they are cheap, but because the market has not figured out what they are worth yet. And that gap between what something actually is and what the market currently prices it at is where deals live. Here is what happens next if you want to actually move on this. First, I want to point you toward the specific resources that will change your search. Go to the description and grab the full list we compiled. It includes direct links to federal property auctions, state land lease programs, county surplus building databases, and the nonprofit that specializes in historic adaptive reuse financing. Bookmark every single one of these. Second, start building your network. Contact local historic preservation societies. They know every abandoned building in their area and which ones are actually buyable. Talk to real estate agents who specialize in commercial or unconventional properties. Call county assessors' offices and ask directly about tax foreclosed buildings in your target area. The official channels exist. They are just not advertised on mainstream real estate sites because most people do not know to look there. Third, when you find a building that speaks to you, do not rush. Have it properly inspected. Get a structural engineer on site. Understand the zoning. Understand the renovation costs. Talk to lenders who understand adaptive reuse projects. Not every bank will finance a bunker conversion, but some will. And there are specialty lenders who focus specifically on historic properties and unusual projects. Do the work up front. It saves heartbreak later. And finally, ask yourself the real question. Not whether you can afford this property, but whether you actually want this kind of life. Because buying an abandoned courthouse or a Cold War bunker or a 100-year-old schoolhouse is not a financial decision, it is a lifestyle decision. It is saying yes to something that is strange and authentic and nobody else is doing. It is choosing the road less traveled in real estate. And that choice is always available to you if you know where to look. The properties we have covered today are real. The prices are real. The locations are real. The only variable is whether you are ready to see possibility where others see abandonment. Whether you are ready to take something forgotten and make it truly yours. If you are, then these deals exist for you. And honestly, there are more of them out there than most people realize. They are sitting there, waiting for someone with vision to show up and understand what they could become. So here is what I want you to do right now. First, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. New properties are dropped every single week, and you do not want to miss the next one that might change your entire life. Second, drop a comment down below and tell us what property type speaks to you the most. Courthouse, bunker, schoolhouse, factory. What is the building that makes you think, I could actually live there? I read every single comment, and honestly, it helps me understand what you are looking for. And finally, share this video. Send it to a friend who has ever talked about wanting something unconventional. Because the people who are going to find these deals are the people who even know they exist. And right now, most people have absolutely no idea. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next week with another property that almost nobody knows is available. End of script.